This is Sarah with the library. There we are. Hello, everybody. This is Sarah with the Mount Airy branch from the Carroll County Public Library, and I'm here with Michael Judd, and we're going to talk about green burials and home funerals. And Michael, I'm going to let you go ahead and take over and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Great. Yeah, thanks for hosting this conversation. My name is Michael Judd. I live in Frederick, Maryland. We live in the entrance to the watershed here on about 25 acres, mixed woodland, creek running through it, what we really think of as paradise. The home you see behind me, we have a circular straw bale home. We built ourselves over many years from the woods that we live in. So we're very gratefully here, very tuned into this place, and have been really grateful too that we've been able to create a home cemetery on our where we live, and to keep our loved ones, in the same space. Came about through my father's passing, which just occurred 7 years ago. This last weekend, we got together. My brother and sister came, and families came together and just celebrated remembering him. But my father is this very amazing spirit who lived a very wonderful, strong life, albeit a conventional life. Not necessarily the path I have taken. More into the woods. But as he was in his transition, he had about almost a year and a half of transition. From when he was diagnosed with mesothelioma in his lungs, because he was in the Navy in submarines. And I guess when they were making the submarines, they were using asbestos everywhere. So that finally showed up for him, and he handled it beautifully. The way that he handled his whole process of transition has been one of the greatest gifts for my life, for sure, and for everyone who had the good fortune to be witness to his transition. It was really a way shower. And I don't know, a good year into his transition, we'd had an early hospice visit, just sort of what does hospice do? Come and talk to us. And they left us a sheet of paper that had resources on it and information. And at the very back, on the very bottom of the page, was one little mention about home funerals and home burials. And I sort of took that and talked to the family about it. I'm an ecological designer, and I live closely with the earth and plants and life cycles. This was the first time a loved one, first time I was really faced with a loved one dying. So I'd had no real experience in this. The few experiences I'd had were pretty conventional. So this was all new territory, but I said, this is something that I would like to, for us to talk about and explore. And, we got together and sort of agreed that, yes, this would be something we'd be interested in talking about. And that included my father. And my father, who had been planning to donate his body to science, being an engineer and, just thinking along those lines of just wanting to give back, said that he'd be willing to sort of, go the path of creating a home cemetery and doing natural burial, because he could see how important that could be to us. Once we started realizing what was possible, he wanted to support us. Again, remarkable being. And so then that kind of got us started looking and learning more. And I believe that hospice had a link to Crossings. Crossings.net is a wonderful resource. And it's a nonprofit. And I want to say it's actually based out of Silver Springs in Maryland. And it's a very how-to. And this is, so there's a couple different categories here maybe I should point out. There's There's home funerals, which I'll talk about. We did that as well, where we held space, for my father, and then a month later, his mother, who was waiting for him to passed, and we went through the same process of a home funeral. So you could have a home funeral and then have a conventional burial. You can hybridize. I've learned that there's many variations and a surprising amount of choices and freedom for us to choose from. Actually quite surprised in a world so full of regulations and laws and rules that we are still quite able and capable of caring for our loved ones ourselves as they pass, both in our homes. We can transport them, and then under the right circumstances, we can create a home cemetery and bury our loved ones ourselves and not have anybody else involved in the process. And I'll tell our story so that a lot of this comes out just through the story. But crossings.net was very helpful in preparing and learning just about, what can you do? You don't really have to do anything when someone dies. Death is not an emergency. And I think we've forgotten that. It's actually a really powerful time to be calm and to be quiet and to sit in love and with love for our loved ones. So if there's nothing else that gets carried away from this talk, just remember death is not an emergency. There's nothing you have to run and do. Ideally, you sit and you be with it. So that all said, and all the learning that we did in preparation, and we had a wonderful guide to a very wise woman in our community, Rose Sinkovich, Rose's mom. Some of you all might know her, know of her. And Frederick, she had the Four Winds Yoga Studio, and anyway, she'd been helping other people in their last transitions. What might be called a death doula. Someone who just comes and just gives you support and, gentle guidance, because again, there's not a whole lot to do, but you typically when someone dies, there is confusion and just a lot of emotions, and it's not the easiest time to be thinking or doing. So pre-planning is huge, regardless of which direction you might go with your last transition, funeral, burial. Pre-planning is so helpful to really to the others. It's almost just a consideration and love for all your loved ones who are the ones having to figure out what to do. So pre-planning is huge. So fortunately, we were able to do that. We did it with my father. And so first I called the health department and I'm like, well, what's the process? And so they'll say, well, we'll send one of our agents out to look at your site. So they come out and they look at the site that we've picked out. Now you don't have to have large acreage to do this. You can do a home burial site on as small as a quarter of an acre, potentially less. So the fact that we have 25 acres, that doesn't matter. But we do. We got 25 acres. So we picked a quarter of an acre for a home cemetery. And he came out and said, okay, it's 100 foot from the well. It's 100 foot from your stream. Looks fine to me. The next stage was for us to get it surveyed. So we had a surveyor come out and they survey and created a plat for that cemetery space and an easement, just basically, a road or an access to that. So since we did that to our property, that means that if we sell the property, we still have access to come back into that quarter acre and continue burying, our loved ones for, centuries. So anyway, so we had it surveyed. That might have cost upwards of $2,000. That was the only price, the only thing that we ever spent money on to have a cemetery that can now bury hundreds of us. So just from the economics of it, this is a huge money saver. So nothing else clicks. that might. So then we took that and we registered it with the permit office, basically just so it's on record. There's your plat. And then within a number of months, my father passed early February, and we had a hospice bed, which was great. Kind of like a little trundle bed, which was very helpful. And he was in our living room. And the nurse, the hospice nurse, knew our intentions, that we were, that we had a home cemetery, and that we were going to, go, bury him ourselves. So the morning that he died, the hospice nurse came out and confirmed that he was dead. She went back to the hospice doctor and had him sign the death certificate, which is a 3-page document, and brings that back. Doctor never came out anything, which is the hospice nurse, and gave us the death certificate and said, "Good luck." Right. And fortunately, Rose Ma and one of her sons had shown up. We'd called and just kind of helped guide us. And, we took the trundle bed into our living room and lit candles, put up pictures of my father, his loved ones, his brother, had rose water, and it just created a really loving, peaceful environment. And those of us, by that point, there was a dozen of us at the house. Some of us wanted to be with him and help. We bathed him and we changed his clothes. And some people wanted to go and dig the grave. That's what they needed. So they went out and started digging the grave, just hand digging the grave. And some wanted to cook. Some wanted to make food, wanted to be in the kitchen. That's where they were comfortable. It was kind of nice that there was something for everybody to do, or choice. I realized in doing this that just having something to do was very, very, that was the ritual. That's what ritual is. It's just like, doing something in a meaningful space. And so that was a new eye opener for me. I always figured ritual had to come from organized religion, or you had to be a spiritual guru or something. And then I realized that it's just doing things with love and meaning, and setting that space up and getting my father situated. And another key piece to all this actually was getting dry ice. So keep the body cool, very important, because we kept my father and sat with him for 3 days before we buried him in our house. So to do that, dry ice is pretty key, and dry ice is available at many, usually liquor stores or somewhere. And it's what it is. It's dry ice. It's very cold. Wrap it in a towel. We put one, under his back, under his shoulders, one on his belly, one under his head. And you couldn't see any of that. Nice, but it cooled his body down so that all those processes were kind of just stalled. And again, we didn't know what to expect. The whole 3 days came from reading and hearing from a lot of other cultures and practices that there's a transition period for the body, call it what you want, energy, life, that takes place. And that many cultures have recognized this, and they'll sit and hold space with their loved ones while that transition is complete. And it's like, well, sure, we're not in a hurry. We're not in a hurry. We I needed every minute of those 3 days. Potentially could have used more, but it was very interesting to that. You could see a difference. A lot of it was in the skin tone of my father. Another part of it, it's hard to describe, but that there was still some presence in transition. And then on the morning of the third day, it was obvious he was gone. But it wasn't until then. And so from my own experience, that there is a transition that's happening. And I akin it to, like when a baby is born, we hold so much space for that, both in preparation, and then when the baby comes in, there's so much love, there's so much care for the mother and the family, and it's just you're holding a lot of space for that first transition, which is coming into the world. And the other, just as inevitable, is leaving the world. It's another transition, and it's now my understanding that I always want to be able to hold my loved ones in that space. That it's an important space to hold for them, and then it's a very important space, for ourselves. And I didn't know any of this until we did it. And being really close to my father, and I think that all helped very much. I was very, very present, as hard as that was. And it was just good just to sit there and be with him all those times. And then, so on the third day, well, actually, I'll step back because, interestingly enough, the second night afterwards, a lot of friends and family had heard that he died, and wanted to come see him, wanted to come see us. So we kind of had an unplanned wake. Again, didn't know what that was. Never really been to one. We do have some Irish blood in us, so maybe that helped. But it ended up just being this great big house gathering. There was a lot of love. There was a lot of support. There was a lot of friends, a lot of family. Definitely some whiskey was being drunk too, but whatever. It was just a time that a lot of people just come and they could see Dad, and they could come and give him their love and support us. And so that was great. I mean, that we didn't expect that, but it was very helpful, and it was very supportive to us as well as a family. And I think everyone else have that chance to come visit Dad in his own home, and to see him, laying there in his own home, natural, wearing his clothes, his normal clothes. I think was really important to everybody who got to come. And so then the next morning, it was just kind of, our family, extended family, there might have been 12, 14 of us. And we had, a friend told me a very simple way to create a carrier for my father. And it was a 2x6 board. Maybe it was like 8 feet long. Very simple piece of lumber. And then take a couple of 2x2s. I'm going to say maybe like 2 feet long. And then we just drilled that on one side of the board, and that's where our carriers were. So then we placed my father on the board off of the hospice bed. And my mother had some leftover silk fabric from my sister's wedding dress she'd made 30 years before. And took that, and we wrapped my father and the board together. And that secured him to the board. And then we just had a slow walk procession, down the lane to where it was. And that was really meaningful too. The walking and being together like that had its own unknown, again, experience for us. And then we were graveside, and it was just hand dug, 3 or 4 feet. And again, nobody was there. Nobody came out. Nobody checked. There was nobody but us. And we lowered him in with ropes and left him in the board. And that board was the only thing that really got in it. But all biodegradable. All things that were just gonna feed the earth and mold back into it. And we stood around, and my mother read a beautiful poem. And it was an opportunity for us to share whatever we wanted to about my father and how he touched our lives, and so that and then that was it. We filled the grave in. I didn't want to go anywhere, so I got a couple straw bales and made a fire, and just started a fire. Just sat there next to the grave, way into the night. I was joined by, a few others who also just wanted to be there. And I just needed all the opportunity I could get to grieve and to process what was happening. And then a week later, we had a memorial service at our neighboring church, which we were, used to be members of and part of. It's in our community, and it was a huge turnout. My dad was very loved, and so that was great too. We had all these different experiences, opportunities for, just to fulfill the needs of everybody as much as anything. And yeah, and that's the story. And then a similar story in some ways was his mother, my grandmother. She had been living at Homewood, which is a retirement community, just a mile or so down the road. And likewise, we sat with her and her passing, and then we talked to Homewood and said, "Look, we're gonna take my grandmother, and we're gonna stick her in our vehicle, and we're gonna drive her up to our house because that's where we're gonna bury her. And this is all legal because you act basically." I'll take a few steps back. When you get that death certificate, I remember my sister and I sitting at the table looking at it, and the first page is for the doctor just to say, okay, no foul play. Second page is what is the second page? Second page, gosh, I guess it's been a while. But what was challenging? You had to fill out the second page and third page. Oh, the second page was one that you had to submit, to I think it's to the health department. You have to submit a document from the death certificate. You have to, within a number of days, that actually has to be submitted. But what caught us up was that every time it just kept saying funeral director, funeral director, funeral director, and I was like, well, that's us. We're the funeral director. Like, they didn't have so few people do this themselves that everyone assumes you have to have a funeral director. You're supposed to have a funeral director, and no, you don't. I mean, you can, and a funeral director can actually hybridize part of this for you, in the sense that you could say, okay, well, and it might be your loved one's choice to have a conventional burial or cremation. And cremation is not natural burial. It uses a lot of resources. But we can talk about green burial, natural burial, home burial, green burial. Typically, we're talking about very similar, very simplified, way of returning to the earth without using resources in the process or polluting in the process. So I lost my train of thought there on what I was talking about. Oh, so the document. And then the third page is a transportation, page, permission. And again, funeral director. I'm like, well, let's just put our name in there. We just stuck our name in all of that. And basically it allows you to transport your loved one. You're allowed to do that. Pick them up from the hospital, stick them in your car. We went down to Homewood, and, we wrapped my grandmother very similarly, made another board, wrapped her in her favorite quilt, and had a friend who had a hatchback Subaru. He pulled up. We made sure no one was walking by. And we brought my grandmother out, and we stuck her in the back of the Subaru and drove her up home, put her in our living room, and sat with her for 3 days, and then buried her ourselves. So in some ways, it was very liberating and to know that we can do this. And we're actually allowed to do this because people that care are making sure that this freedom stays with us at the lawmaking level in Annapolis and each state, because obviously there would be a lot of, private interest to not have, home funerals. But we can. It's totally legal. Now, if you want to hybridize your situation, where you're going to be buried at, your church in a casket, embalmed, all that stuff, or maybe not embalmed, but you want to hold your loved one at home for a day, 2 days. Different funeral homes will work with you and say, okay, that's fine. We'll help you. We'll help you with the paperwork. We understand you want to stay with your loved one for a day or 2 days. That's fine. And they might have limitations on that. They might say, well, 36 hours, and then we're going to come get your loved one. And then they usually put them in refrigeration, or embalm them, or go through whatever it is you decide to do. Just know that you can also just be with your loved ones, regardless of your choice for cremation or burial. But I do support learning and thinking about doing more of a natural or green burial, uh, instead of making your final act one that takes more resources. A lot of precious tropical, usually hardwoods, are used in caskets. A lot of metal is used in caskets. Big, heavy-duty concrete vaults are put over caskets just so the grass doesn't, slump a little bit. And then embalming and the fluids and the chemicals. I mean, really, it's an insane amount of resources that you potentially are taking with you as your final act, and that'll probably happen if you don't clearly set what you want in advance. I know a lot of people who consider themselves environmental, green, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, do not have anything set in place for when they die. And chances are their family are going to run them through a conventional system and take a lot of resources, which is not at all what they would want, but they didn't do anything in advance. So I recommend, there's a great document called 5 Wishes, and it's from a nonprofit out of Florida, and it's a legally binding advance directive. So this means that it's accepted legally as your wishes for final resuscitation. But what's great about 5 Wishes is it goes further into the discussion. It asks really great questions. It's like, well, what kind of environment would you like in your passing? What kind of music would you like? It asks these great questions, so it helps us, because it's a lot of people. This is not a comfortable conversation. And what I encourage people to do is get 5 wishes. If you're listening to this, you're probably already somewhat open to this. Fill it out yourself, then get other copies, and then take it to your loved ones. Take it to your parents. Anyone 18 or over, period, should really consider, having, their plan in place. And after you've done it yourself, then taking it to your loved ones. And if it's not an easy conversation, say, hey, look, can we just do this for 10 minutes and we'll never talk about it again? Something like that. Whatever it takes, sit down with them, do it, have it written out. And again, that'll make a world of difference when your loved one dies, and you're like not sure, or you have a conflicting opinion from another family member about what, should be done. Well, it's like, well, look, here, they wrote it down. This is what they wanted. It's not an argument. This is not about me. This is what they wanted. And trust me, it can save a lot of challenge and just make things easier for everybody and what tends to be a challenging time. So there are a few opportunities for green natural burial in the state of Maryland. I do have a Word document of some of these resources. I could send to the library if there's any way to disseminate that. But a couple of the conventional cemeteries have created areas of their cemetery. These are called hybrid cemeteries. Basically, it's a small section of a conventional cemetery where they allow you to be buried without, hardwood casket, embalming, metal, no concrete vault liner over you, et cetera, which is definitely a great step in the right direction. But creating a full green natural cemetery is in the works. There's one in the works, I think, north of Baltimore, and there's one around Silver Springs. I believe that's a Muslim cemetery, but really also focused on opening its doors for everyone, because they practice. A lot of traditions practice natural burial already, where their tradition is to be connected with the earth and the ground when they're buried. And this is the way that, just 150 years ago, probably most all of our ancestors did it. It's not, this actually isn't really new age. This is just simplifying, and doing what we did before, which was really come together and spend time together around passings. support each other and be with a loved one and go through the process ourselves and support each other in it and not sort of hand it off. I know every circumstance is different, and sometimes it's very grateful to have a funeral home and a funeral director. Just know that you have choices, and some of those choices can bring a lot of healing and a lot of completion and meaning, and beauty. My dad dying and passing was one of the hardest things, but also one of the most beautiful things that I've experienced in my life, and it's changed my life. It's given me a great example. It's made me think about and talk about dying and feeling better about it, because it affects us all. We all have a story about dying, whether we know it or not. And if that story is not one that's really supporting you, or it's something you're scared about, then explore changing your story, because it's going to happen, and it affects us now. The way we think about death affects the way we think about living, or the way that we do live every day. So, just having conversations about it, and you're like, well, then what do I do? Just see who wants to talk to you about it. Just talk about it, whatever that is. Usually, everyone's got a story or have some way to talk. There's this great project called Death Cafes. I think it was started out of England. And it's wonderful. The Hood College here in Frederick had a couple that I've been to, and maybe they still have them every now and again. You can host your own. And it's really just sitting around a table with people you don't know, and whatever you want to talk about around death and dying, whatever it is. And if you have troubles coming up with something, they got these cute little cards on the table. You can, helps you with the subject. But really, that's all it is. We're eager. Whether we know it or not, we're eager to talk about this. We're eager to come into a healthy relationship around dying, and it can be beautiful. Yeah.
Wow. That's an amazing story. And it really, hoping it hits home with a lot of people. It certainly hits home with me. We did have one comment so far. It's from Facebook, said, I would be interested in the document you're referencing and the source for 5 wishes. So we will make sure that some way we can, once this broadcast is live, it has ended, it will be housed on YouTube. So we might be able to get those like in the comments on YouTube or something. Some way we can get that information to you. Absolutely. Trying to think if I have any questions for you. You've done a very thorough job of explaining your experience. And I think, as you said, it's something, oh, here's a good one. A comment just came in. Do you know of any good books on this topic?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, there's a whole spectrum of books around this. A lot of them, I really just talk about how the funeral industry, has sort of taken control of the way we deal with death. And I think understanding that a little bit is helpful, but I don't feel like, having to read a bunch of books about it is helpful either. So I like Caitlin Dougherty is this wonderful, very humorous. She's actually a mortician. She has a place in LA, and she's just funny. And she started a movement called The Good Death. And she tells a great story about how she, came out of mortician school. I don't know if that's what you call it, but and started into the practice in cremation. And her I think it's her first book, and it's called "Smoke Gets in Your Eyes." And I think I have that in the list that I can submit here. I've got a list of books that are recommended. Undertaken with Love is a very, very good, very very helpful sort of how-to as well. Changing Landscapes is a favorite book of mine, and it's actually a compilation by a lot of people in the green and natural burial movement. But if some of them are also funeral, green burial, funeral homes. that share their experience. And so it's got a great spectrum. Those three are really my favorite. There's more, and I can submit those, but those I find to be very useful and helpful. And then Caitlin Doherty has a great YouTube channel, very popular. She's got a few other books. Anything she writes is really very entertaining, very educational, and it just really helps you begin to just think about these things in a, I don't know, in a, gosh, in a, I don't know, in a very realistic and somewhat fun way, if that's possible to imagine. And learning about other cultures. She has a book she went around the world and studied all these different cultural practices around death, and it's amazing how different they are, and how intimate many of them are, and with death and with their loved ones. It's very interesting to read that because it kind of reflects that we're kind of uptight, and generally speaking, and North American popular culture around death and how we deal with it and what we do. And it's like, gosh, there's so many other traditions that really embrace it and get in there and get with it. And I'm not saying that's always the best choice, but I don't know. It's just helpful. Anything that kind of breaks the ice and makes us realize that this can be something to celebrate. It's possible.
Great. I was actually just looking up. I know that we used to have smoke gets in your eyes here. If we don't have it here, we can certainly get it through our ILL system. And she has written, I think she wrote a book. I can't remember the title, but it's something like, "Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs?" Or I don't know. It was something. It's a very funny, but it's a take on death and dying and what happens to the body and everything like that. And it's I've heard of Caitlin, so I would also recommend that because I have read some of her stuff and it's very good.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great if the library got all of her books.
Yeah, I'll have to look. But I know we've had them in the past, and if not, we have a great system where we can get something we can share throughout the state with our other county partners. So we can definitely get those for anybody that's interested.
I guess I'll throw out there, I'm also looking to help create a public green natural burial site, ideally here in Frederick County in Maryland. And really, we're ready to do it. The challenge is, finding someone who has land that they'd be willing to sell, but, in contingency that that it would be accepted for natural burial site. They don't distinguish natural and conventional burial here. It would just be, can it be a cemetery or not? It's actually surprisingly somewhat straightforward. We just need someone to say, yeah, let's try and see if this land will work. Mm-hmm. And we're happy to buy it and do all that. We're organized and ready. We're just kind of waiting for it to come forward. It's not something I want to push, but something I'm ready to support.
That's amazing. I think that would, I think, as people become more conscientious about the environment and climate change, I think this is a really, and death is such a taboo topic, but being able to talk about it and understand that there are options, I think that's a really great thing for people to know.
Yeah. And I think some of that's just being aware of the resource usage that can go into your conventional burial. Your impact, your environmental impact is huge. Google it, look it up. The numbers are astounding, especially collectively, for even just our country, how much metal gets used. It's something like each year, just in the US, enough metal in caskets in this country could build the Golden Gate State Bridge.
Wow.
It's just insane. You could, with the concrete that's used, you could make a highway between like New York and Chicago. And that's just 1 year.
Right.
How many swimming pools, get filled with fluid, it's astounding. And then cremation, people often go, well, they're like, well, I don't want to do that, so I'll get cremated. But if you have an environmental, awareness, and that's important to you, know that cremation uses an insane amount of energy because we're water. You're basically, so your last act is taking a lot of resources. Now, I can respect that some traditions, being transitioned by fire is a calling. And if that's your calling, yes. But if it's just a default mode, know that it also has an impact environmentally, and that really just being laid back into the earth with biodegradable. You can have a biodegradable coffin. You could use like locally harvested poplar wood. You could do some willow. They have willow woven baskets.
Hmm.
I'm crazy about willows. I'm growing a lot of willows, so one day I'll probably weave some caskets too. Or just like you say, a shroud, your favorite clothes. It doesn't have to be complicated. I know there's been some popularity about those mushroom suits. It's kind of a
Oh.
gimmick. It's kind of a gimmick. You don't need one. The earth and the microorganisms and eventually the fungi and everything else is going to get you anyway.
Hmm.
But again, I think it's cool because it's making people think and talk and become interested. So
Right.
anything that gets that conversation going, I think's good.
Great. That's awesome. Well, this has been wonderful. Does anybody else have any other questions? I haven't seen anything else pop up. I want to thank you for your time, Michael, and for your story. And I hope I'm going to go ahead and we're going to end and
All
hope
right.
everybody has a good night. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Bye.